This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey everyone, I'm the Blood Guy and welcome back to another review of a serial killer docuseries. And this is one that I actually put off for 2 years at this point. This is one that came out in 2021. And I started watching it, but then when I realized the main point of this series, I kind of stopped watching. I kind of lost interest. But then I decided, okay, I'll actually check this out. I'll see what it's all about. And it's actually pretty good. I can't say I buy into a lot of it, but it's still a pretty decent watch. And it's another one from Netflix, and it is 2021's The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, which of course is based on the book by Maury Terry, The Ultimate Evil, The Search for the Sons of Sam, which the book originally came out in 1987, and it's all about this guy, this investigative reporter, Maury Terry, on how after David Berkowitz was arrested for the Son of Sam murders, he noticed that there were some things that didn't quite add up. So he started what ended up becoming this, 38, 40-year investigation in this huge rabbit hole that it took him down into trying to prove or finding all the connections in the Son of Sam case to the occult, other cults, including Charles Manson, all these other murders all over the country, and ultimately leading to Berkowitz not acting alone. And kind of ends with how people just saw it as a huge conspiracy, crazy, and how no one's really buying it. But people are still looking into it now. Now, of course, it was directed by Joshua Zeman, who I believe the way it's presented is it opens up with all these boxes of journals and audio tapes and maps and diaries that Maury Terry left. I believe it was the director, kind of as if to say, please do something with this. And so that's kind of the background. We do get some dramatization, not too much. We do get a voiceover narrator. Maury Terry passed away, I believe, in 2015. Yeah, December 10th, 2015. And so he basically embarked on a 38-year investigation. But the voice of Maury Terry, with all the audio that's used in this, is voiced by Paul Giamatti, who I've always liked. I've always liked him as an actor. So that's really the only acting we kind of get is Maury Terry, Paul Giamatti as Maury Terry. It's 4 episodes. The first episode is more so an objective historical look at the Son of Sam murders as they happened and the investigation leading up to the arrest of David Berkowitz. Now, and then the other 3 is the gradual descent into everything that Terry finds. And then it kind of has a depressing ending with how no one really believes him. Now, the reason why I put this off is because, to me, I always saw David Berkowitz as Son of Sam. And I still believe that David Berkowitz is the sole Son of Sam who committed all 13 shootings, 6 murders, over 8 attacks between the summer of 76, summer of 77. So I kind of went into this thinking that it was going to be kind of like that Shining documentary, Room 237, where that is 4 people on their lifelong obsessions with The Shining and finding all these hidden meanings and symbolisms and what Kubrick was really trying to say with The Shining, with all this evidence that they found over their intense investigation. But really just sounds like crazy conspiracy nonsense. That's kind of what I thought this was going to be. I would have much rather this been a Netflix documentary on, which is probably what I was expecting when it first came to Netflix in 2021, and why I was so quick to turn it off back then, on either the Son of Sam investigation or Berkowitz himself, or both. Not so much this investigative reporter on all these crazy findings he found, where he's kind of connecting the web of everything. But going into it, it's not so much Room 237 as I thought it was going to be. There were a lot of things that was said where I kind of thought, well, I think anyone looking for those answers will probably find them, and which is what I was expecting. And there was a lot of that in it. But there were a couple things that had me scratching my head, like, wow, that is a good point. That is a good find. But then there was a lot of it that I thought was just pure coincidence. And still, that's kind of what I think it is. I mean, it's still a wildly interesting documentary. It doesn't feel as mind-numbingly crazy as Room 237. It still is very intriguing. What's more fascinating is just the 38-year dedication that this guy had for, this one belief that he had, and how he chased it down, every lead, every place on the map, every story, every link. He chased it, and how he ultimately died. He chased this for the rest of his life, essentially. I find that more fascinating than some of the findings itself. But ultimately, some of the findings, it is all interesting. I was expecting this crazy, just like, wow, this guy's grasping at straws. But no, a lot of it is feasible. A lot of it you kind of can make sense of, but ultimately I do find it to be coincidence, or either answers that he was looking for and found. But it's still well made. It's still well directed, very well edited. I love the ending to 2 of the episodes. I think episode 2 and 3 are perfect hooks. That I think if you were watching this week by week, if it was presented that way, they would have been the ultimate cliffhangers of these kind of Netflix true crime docuseries. I loved those endings. The interviews are shot really well. You do get a good, roll call of people that are interviewed, family members and surviving victims of the Son of Sam attacks, law enforcement, including Joseph Borelli and Joe Coffey, 2 guys who very closely involved with the Son of Sam case and are not believers in Maury Terry at all. They're in it. You get a ton of archive footage, news footage, interview footage, and it's still intriguing. It's still very interesting, but it wasn't enough to convert me to his ideas. I'm not even sure if that was the intent of the documentary, because other than Borelli and Coffey, who just have nothing nice to say about these theories. You do have associates of Terry, even them saying, for years I kind of thought he was going too far, and there was stuff that I never believed, but he was passionate about it, so I helped him with it. So it doesn't feel like a complete one-sided conversion piece. You kind of got people on both sides in it, which I thought was good. And it's definitely better than I thought it was going to be, but still, even after watching it, I still probably would have preferred just a documentary on the investigation or David Berkowitz himself. But I still thought that this was very interesting. Now, I still haven't read the book. I picked this up fairly recently. Still haven't had a chance to read it. I mean, it's a pretty thick book, but at some point I'll get around to it. I would say not because of how it's made, because like I said, it's still a very well made documentary. Probably just because of the subject matter of the Netflix true crime docuseries. I might put this at the bottom, or at least at my bottom of favorites, only because I wasn't too interested when I first started it. It did take me a while to kind of pull me in once we got into Terry's investigation. But once the ball got rolling, I was hooked and I was curious to see where it would go and how deep his findings would take him. But ultimately, where I'm still a firm believer that Berkowitz was the sole perpetrator, the sole son of Sam, it it did have to work harder to keep me interested, rather than if it was just a Berkowitz docuseries. So only because of the subject matter, I would say it's at my bottom. But it's still very well made, still very well shot, edited, put together. But even I don't hate the the subject matter or anything. I know anytime someone says it's at my bottom, people on the internet automatically hear I hate it. I wish it'd be burned. No, that's not what that means. So stop. I I mean, it's still very intriguing, and I'm sure anyone who's interested in this case at all. I mean, the Son of Sam case has always been in my top 10 favorite cases to read about, learn about, study. So, this could have been a very interesting piece if this had been more like stuff you didn't know about the Berkowitz case. But where it's more, cause when I watch a true crime documentary, I'm more into objectivity, more factual, more facts, more of analytical breakdowns, rather than theories or, dare I say, conspiracies. But I still found this to be an intriguing watch at the very least, or even if I still don't buy into a lot of it, which I don't. It was still pretty interesting. It's still definitely worth the watch because again, it's the more fascinating thing is just how much this guy put himself through to find the answers that he was looking for, even if he found answers that he was looking for. So, still a very good documentary. So, I'm going to do something a little bit different when I get to the second half of this. I'm actually not going to do the summary on David Berkowitz because this documentary is more about Maury Terry's findings on how there were more killers. So I'm gonna skip over the summary because this one's a bit different, and I'm actually gonna skip over episode 1, which I'll explain when we get to that half. So yeah, probably at the bottom of my Netflix ones, but still very solid, still very interesting. Uh, yeah, not completely sold, but I don't think it's a conversion piece. But still very well made, and very well worth the watch, and not near as crazy I thought it was going to be. So with that, I guess we'll just get into the second half of the review where I go over everything that it covers. So I'll go into everything that the docuseries covers, and I kind of figured that to save for time, I would skip over episode 1, because episode 1 is pretty much a very straightforward, kind of rushed breakdown of the Son of Sam murders as they are. Very factual. Kind of just goes murder by murder, what the investigation was doing, all the way up to the arrest of David Berkowitz. So, kind of anything that you can find in any other Son of Sam documentary. I figured just to save for time because this goes down quite the rabbit hole with a lot of information. I figured that since the main point of the docuseries was all of Maury Terry's findings that makes up the ultimate evil, kind of skip over episode 1 because that's pretty much what you'll see in any other Son of Sam doc, and focus more on episodes 2 through 4, like his actual findings. So, yeah, episode 1, which is called Hello from the Gutters is all straightforward. The Son of Sam murders themselves. You do get interviews like with law enforcement members, some family members, some survivors, and it goes all the way up into the arrest of David Berkowitz. So episode 2, and also ends with Maury Terry realizing that there's probably more to this than law enforcement is actually looking at. And I think it starts with him realizing, David Berkowitz lived right by the cars. There's John Carr, so he's going to start there. So episode 2 is called Catch 44, which I like that title, play on Catch 22. And it starts off August 16th of 77, 6 days later, which is David Berkowitz's arraignment. We get a montage of news footage of Berkowitz, footage of him being driven to court with all the crowds of people, interviews with locals on what should happen to him, press conference with Nathan Berkowitz, his adoptive father. It goes into his evaluation, angry loner, failure, angry at women, found out he was adopted and recently rejected by his mother, which, though Berkowitz would later say that that was untrue, that he found his birth mother and they actually had a great relationship, and how it was a very fleeting evaluation. Everything was rushed. They're pretty much how the search was rushed and illegal. The arrest, the evaluation, the arraignment, everything was rushed almost as a way to just end the case right there. We get audio of David Berkowitz and how he didn't hate these people. Sam used him to do it. And we do get photos of his apartment, like just the kind of mess that it was, the hole in the wall, like, hi, I'm Mr. Williams, I live in this hole. My neighbors don't take care of their families, and really bizarre stuff he wrote all over his walls. All kinds of news footage about people talking about the 6,000-year-old demon named Sam that talked to Berkowitz through the 1,000-year-old dog, and just kind of how that took on a life of its own. And kind of like the Killer Clown with Gacy, how that just really took off. Then more on Maury Terry, because the first episode kind of goes into who Maury Terry was. How he was very inquisitive and always looking for answers, how he could just absorb information. Whenever he latched onto something, he never let go, how he got into investigative journalism. And this delves more into that. Didn't like simple answers, very driven, focused, didn't follow the rules. And also, every time we get audio from Maury Terry, because of course he passed away a few years before this was made, he's voiced by Paul Giamatti. I know I said that already, but so it's actually Paul Giamatti, but it's I don't know if it's passages from the book or just like later diary entries that he made, stuff that was found in the boxes that was left for the director. But there's audio, Paul Giamatti as Terry, saying that he couldn't write another mundane story like he's been doing, and that he's on to something big. So Tom Bartley, former editor of Gannett newspapers, on how in 1977 Terry started selling this story about Berkowitz not acting alone to him. He didn't buy it. And then Maury on how it all starts with John Carr. For him, it started with John Carr, son of Sam Carr, mentions the survivors of the November 26, 76 shooting, Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lamino, how they described their assailant, because that was the shooting where they were sitting on the stoop. Berkowitz walked up to them, asked for directions, shot them, then ran away. But they survived, so they were able to give a sketch, and the sketch didn't look like Berkowitz. To him, it looked more like John Carr. How the bangs hanged down in front of his face. He had the nickname John Wheaties, which made him think back to the letter. I believe it was the Joseph Borelli letter. Here are some names to help you out. Beelzebub, another one, John Wheaties. But how he also had a sister named Wheat Car, and he was nicknamed John Wheaties. Uh, so then it goes into John Carr's childhood and family. Uh, One was classmates with they interview a classmate of his, and how Sam Carr was known to be abusive and would actually lock John and Michael up in the attic as punishment, which goes back to that same letter where it says Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic, and uh, and also beats his family. I am son of Sam. So then it goes into, did he actually write it? Did John Carr write it? It goes into how Gannett newspapers wouldn't greenlight the story, but he was encouraged to keep digging and keep looking. So, because it was too thin, too speculative, excuse me, which at that point, I agree. It goes into how he got a press pass and became part of the investigation. Story of Berkowitz was his story of Berkowitz was alone responsible for the Moskowitz Violente shooting is published. Again, because the sketch of the eyewitness did not match Berkowitz. Old interview with witness Tommy Zano on not thinking that it was Berkowitz. Old interview with Cecilia Davis, who was the woman that was walking her dog, saw Berkowitz walk back to his car, see the parking ticket on his car the night of the Moskowitz Violente shooting. And then it shows with a map how over here, where Davis saw Berkowitz get into his car with the parking ticket, and where Moskowitz and Violente was shot, 5 blocks away, 2 minutes of time, and how they ran that distance, they tried that distance, is pretty physically impossible for him to be in both places at those time frames. And then sightings of a yellow Volkswagen, which was said in the news, but how Berkowitz drove like a bluish Ford. It mentions Jim Whittaker, who is a detective turned reporter who got to know David Berkowitz. He was the one that could actually go in the hospital where Berkowitz was and interview him. Audio and photos of one of their interviews. Terry writes to Whittaker and how it's all a plot and that there are other sons. Berkowitz writes a letter to Whittaker saying how it's all a plot, there are other sons. So we're introduced to D.A. Eugene Gold, I'm sorry, I was kind of going too fast with these notes, so they're not as good as other ones, but it goes into how D.A. Eugene Gold refuses to reopen the case on Terry's findings. They're too loose. Audio of Terry saying, we're not on the same side. They don't want to know the truth. They just want to cover their ass. His words. It goes into the mistakes the police made, such as breaking into the car before the search warrant, found weapons, then got the search warrant, which would in turn make the weapons insufficient evidence. Terry on how John Carr was never interviewed. Everything with Berkowitz was rushed because right after they had the largest promotional ceremony in the city's history. More audio from Terry saying that there's a new lead from a teenager just behind Berkowitz's home. And it goes into the old aqueduct, the old Croton aqueduct, which goes from in behind the homes of Berkowitz and Carr, the cars, and goes all the way under Untermeyer Park. It's like hundreds of feet of tunnels. So it goes into that. It says how several dogs were found dead, German Shepherds. News articles shown of this area. There was the old pump house, which was known by locals as Devil's Cave. Blood all over the floors and ceilings. uh, satanic graffiti everywhere, and it was a known meeting place for this group called Children, or the Children, and also how it was also known as those tunnels were known as uh, the gutters. So another reference to that letter, "Hello from the gutters." So then Terry, on how it's time to look deeper into the dark arts. We're introduced to Gary Lachman, or Lackman, who's an occult historian, on what occult is, how pop culture by the 1970s had its influence. Then it goes into the difference between New Age and more darker and extremists in the occult. Audio of Terry on satanic references in the Son of Sam letters. Terry says that the most illuminating clue is the Son of Sam symbol. And this was when I really started thinking, having that thought of, if there's someone looking for something, then they're going to find it. This was kind of when I really had that. Because the Son of Sam symbol is like that, well, his symbol goes, it wasn't like the X with the male symbol, female symbol, and a few other ones. But it traces back to a black magician, Eliphas Levi, who drew this talisman, and yeah, it was that symbol. He traced it back to an Eliphas Levi talisman, which has the words Berkyle for Berkowitz, Amasarak as Samkar, because early Satanists would use backwards phrases and anagrams. And oh yeah, and so this is when I really thought he was making a leap. Lackman had just said that the occult and black magic is the kind of thing where if someone's looking for something, then they'll find it. So he even said that as I was thinking it. How the tunnels were known as gutters. So then it goes into the Sam Sleeps paper, which was a newspaper that was put out, and on the front page was this huge picture of David Berkowitz as he slept, headlined Sam Sleeps. It never really comes out and says why it's controversial, yet it goes into the controversy and the huge backlash that the paper had for publishing it, and how they actually put an investigation out into who took the photo and how the paper could be liable for prosecution, but never really says why it was that controversial. It mentions how Berkowitz was unseen at that point, which I didn't think made sense because he was all over the news. It could be because of the tension between the press and the police at that time. The whole glamorizing murder for money aspect. They could be factors, but it never really says. It shows the cover and the press conference footage. So, and that was when Berkowitz was closed off. Terry now could never get to Berkowitz. No one could talk to him. Even through Jim Mitiger, he couldn't get to him, and he was pretty much sealed away. So then we go 6 months after the arrest. Terry on finding John Carr, but finding out he died. He was found dead in Minot, North Dakota, supposed suicide. We do see photos. Terry publishes his story of how Carr could be involved in Son of Sam. So now it's out in the open. People kind of have that idea. But at the same time, Mitiger is arrested for the Sam Sleeps photo, footage of his arrest, and Terry on his belief that it's law enforcement fighting back, because they're really pissed about this entire thing, that someone's looking into the idea that Berkowitz did not act alone. Berkowitz goes on trial and talks about the chaos in the courthouse and the courtroom, footage of the chaos in the hallways, those paintings, like when they can't have cameras in the courthouse, the paintings that they make of the outbursts that Berkowitz had, screaming, quote, Stacy was a whore, I'd kill her again, her mother yelling, you animal, at him, how he lunged toward a window at one point, how he kicked and bit at people that tried to grab him, old interviews with Violente and Mrs. Moskowitz, which the interviewer calls her Berkowitz, and she didn't like that, which I kind of thought was funny. Pleaded and found guilty. Now evidence doesn't matter, and it's over. He's sealed, or he's convicted. So there's not much he can do anyway. It's kind of going to be for his own benefit at this point. Georgiana Byrne, who's the former wife of Maureen Terry, on how she first met Terry in '78, their first date, and how he said it's the 1-year anniversary of the Esau and Suriani murders. Do you want to go there? And that's where they went on their first date. He talked about the case the whole time, and she started to believe him. So then we go to Minot, North Dakota. We're introduced to Michael Coop, who is a retired detective in Minot. He talks about the small town of Minot, what kind of town it is, how Terry went to go meet them, how they went to the Minot Air Force Base where the body was found. We're introduced to Glenn Geetson, the retired sheriff, Ward County, on the night Carr was found, and even how he connected Carr to New York even at that time. Like, why is he here? Why is he all the way out here? Through interviews with Carr's friends, they learned that he was an associate of David Berkowitz. Berkowitz even went to Minot at one point. They had seen Carr draw the Son of Sam symbol 4 months before it was ever seen in print. Lee Slogter, a mental health counselor, on how he met Carr in February of '78, feeling someone was out to get him, how he might be in trouble in New York, and that he had a connection to David Berkowitz and has info that people might want. How Carr practiced satanic rituals and occult activity, such as killing German shepherds and drinking the blood. Very similar things that were going on to New York, including how Carr even had like a taxidermy dog ear, which back in New York when they were talking about all the news footage about the dogs they found one German shepherd with the ear cut off. People in Minot believing that it's all connected, and reports were sent to New York, but of course nothing happened. So after arriving back in New York, Michael Carr was killed in a car accident with photos, and people believe that due to the tire tracks and the way they were on the road, they believed that someone ran him off the road. Gannett Newspapers lets Terry publish the story of the Minot findings. So for the first time, it was publicly connecting Son of Sam to cult activity. Archive interviews with people, victims of families, or families of victims on their belief that there is a cult out there. Press conference of Queens DA John Santucci believing the story, and now Queens is officially involved in the investigation or re-investigating the case. Terry on how I would soon learn how far this cult would reach. And I love the ending of this episode because with that audio of Terry saying, I would soon learn how far this cult would reach, it's this old archive footage of a darkened hallway, and then out of the darkness emerges Charles Manson. And so it just says, hey, Charlie, and he just looks at the camera, he's like, hi, how are you? And then it ends. Like, that's all you need to see to know that this is going to go deep. Just kind of just showing the image of Manson is really all you need. So episode 3 is called The Ultimate Evil. Footage of what's happening in America, on Berkowitz being involved in the cult with Maury Terry. Frank Anthony, who was a producer, on how he met Terry, didn't really believe him. Then went to all the key places with him. Uh, Terry now looking into Michael Carr. They found out he had a history of substance abuse, joined Scientology to help his addictions, also dabbled in the occult, including an organization called The Process, or The Process Church of the Final Judgment, which is rooted in Scientology and mixed with modern occultism. So then we go back and it kind of gives us the roots of The Process, which was in London, 1963, started by Robert de Grimson and his wife Mary McLean. How they branched off and were ejected from Scientology. They went to Mexico. There was huge hurricanes. They want to bring the end of the world and human nature. How they always had German shepherds. That kind of became their symbol. How they branched out to different states, including San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and New Orleans. But it also goes into how they always looked for more extreme things to be into, more extreme desires. It was kind of making me think of like Cenobites to some extent, but not just bring the end of the world, but kind of bring the end to like middle class world, I guess, or values. How a neighbor to them where they were staying in one of the California chapters was Charles Manson. It said San Francisco, which I think that's where it was. Of course, all the Manson murders were in L.A., so maybe he went back and forth. I always thought of Manson as being like an L.A.-based person. But, archived news and documentary footage of Manson and the family and the murders. Manson being influenced by The Process. Terry on meeting with Ed Saunders, who is author of The Family, which is known as one of the biggest books on the actual murders itself, whereas Helter Skelter was more about the court trial. How Manson contributed to an issue of The Process's magazine. Manson and de Grimson attending a party at Polanski's just before the murders, and in 1974, The Process splintered off, and one group emerged just north of New York City, and they called themselves the Children. And comparisons to the Son of Sam murders and the Mansons, like the names of the cults, family, children, inciting fear, both connected to the underworld and the occult. Terry gets a letter from Berkowitz while he's serving in Attica, where he says, "I'm guilty. I didn't act alone. There's other members. One is John Carr. There are others all over the U.S. No one will ever truly believe you." And that line, "no one will ever truly believe you," comes up a few times throughout the rest of this series. How the sheriff in Mina also received letters from Berkowitz. Mentioned someone named Arliss Perry, dead in Stanford, stalked and killed. So then we go to Stanford, California, 1974. October 13th, dead girl in the church, naked under a pew. Altar candles all around her, one in her vagina, one kind of tucked in her bra. An ice pick in her skull. Footage of the scene, but not the body. At first they said it was a suicide, but it's not a suicide. And it was the body of Arliss Perry. So Santa Clara detective gets a letter in 1981 from Berkowitz that he was in a cult with her, or with her killer. So he flies out to New York to interview him. Terry on how this could be bad, as Berkowitz doesn't want to be on record and may never speak again. So like if this guy acts too quickly and kind of spooks Berkowitz or does the wrong thing, Berkowitz could clam up forever. And that's exactly what happens. mentions that he was attacked in Attica, which he was. We even see the huge scar on his neck, which he still has. Refuses to give info and stops being a source for Terry. So he was right. His former wife on his obsession uh, and eventual divorce. A prison informant named Vinny, who served in Attica with Berkowitz, writes a letter claiming to have knowledge, such as the murder of Stacy Moskowitz was orchestrated, filmed, and sold, and how the snuff film was shot by a guy named Ron Sisman. So then we go to Halloween, 1981. Ron Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were shot and killed in his apartment. We get crime scene footage. His apartment looked ransacked, like they were looking for something. Which Ron Sisman was kind of like this guy that shot pornography. His apartment was a drug den full of parties. It goes in how Vinny's letter mentioned codes for people, and RR was a guy who liked bizarre videos and lived in a mansion in Southampton. So Terry figured Roy Radin, who was a rich playboy, partier, to-be producer. He was a producer for a Coppola film called The Cotton Club, which actually, that film was kind of what got him killed, which this will go into. It's supposedly high up in the cult. It goes into Radin's rape charge of actress Melanie Haller. Terry believes that he's the leader of the cult in New York, and but he was found dead, shot in the head in L.A. Terry goes to L.A. to investigate. He finds a Bible near where Roy Radin's body was found, and he thinks that it's proof of his theory on Radin. So we go to 1987, which The Ultimate Evil is finally published in June. It goes into its success. We actually get to see footage of him talking to Maury Povich when he was on Current Affair before he ever had his own TV show, which I thought that was pretty neat. There's also an interview with Mrs. Moskowitz, firmly believing that David Berkowitz was not Stacy's shooter. It goes into the satanic panic at that time, how that overshadowed the point of the book. It goes into all the TV shows he did, but it was seen as more sensational and didn't really help Terry out. It didn't really help out Terry that much. It was more so the talk show hosts wanting to have this crazy theorist talking about, satanic cults, and more so spreading satanic panic rather than his actual theories and the point of the book. So it didn't really help him. 1988, 4 people charged in Roy Radin's murder, but say that it was over financial disputes over the Coppola movie The Cotton Club, not a cult. Georgiana on the downfall of their marriage, including divorce. Joseph Borelli on not believing the book. It goes into other people not listening to him and being perceived as a crazy conspiracy theorist. Terry on David Berkowitz's letter being right, no matter what you say, no one will ever truly believe you. Then 1993, Marcus Quinones, a retired detective in NYPD, on knowing some about the occult, and through those cases of the occult, getting to know David Berkowitz, kind of having a friendship with him. How Berkowitz became a Christian and reading Terry's book, and then finally contacting Terry, and Terry finally being able to meet Berkowitz. And this one ends kind of similar. Upward angle of the prison door, opening, closing, cut to black, Berkowitz voice saying hi Terry, how are you? Another great way to end an episode. So we go to episode 4, which is called a Rabbit Hole. Opens up at the Sullivan Correctional Facility on September 23rd of 93. Terry finally meets David Berkowitz. We get footage of that filmed interview. How Berkowitz was polite, well-spoken, not a raving, crazy Manson-like lunatic, the way kind of how everyone was expecting. Um, hold on. It shows Berkowitz finally admitting to some of the murders, including Donna Loria, Esau and Suriani, and that's it. But was present at all of them, and that John and Michael Carr were members and shot some of the victims. But that's kind of all he would admit to. It even has behind the scenes of, well, actually, no, that's the second one where we see that. It shows the reaction to this information, the news explosion. Carl Denaro, on hearing Berkowitz say he wasn't his shooter. So it goes into the backlash from police, mainly Joseph Borelli and Chief Detective Joe Coffey. Shows older interviews with them, audio of interview with both Terry and Coffey in their antagonistic relationship. Carl Denaro, on him becoming involved in Terry's investigation, so now he's a part of it, and becoming sort of a partner and helping him out, as well as retiree detectives Don Mounts and Kevin Murphy. Actually, how they would all meet up at a bar every so often, go over their findings, and Maury called them the Pine Street Irregulars. That was like the name of their group. And they all appear in this documentary, of course, except for Terry. The three of them appear and talk about Terry, their investigation, their parts in it. They talk about some of their findings, including one guy with the yellow Volkswagen, as spotted in the news, who was paranoid people were after him, then later killed himself. An old interview with a guy named John Paul, who was present at some of the ritualistic ceremonies. Don Mounts on looking into the snuff film and the Sisman-Platzman murder theory, how they were killed by the cult. Audio footage with Jesse Turner, who is another member. And then we go to 1997, Terry's second interview with David Berkowitz, and this one was also filmed. This one became the Son of Sam Speaks special. We do get footage from that. We get footage of like the behind the scenes stuff, like when they cut for a break and Berkowitz says, I can't keep talking about this. It's kind of heavy. Berkowitz admitting to there being a van with people filming it in the final murder, and that it was Ronald Sisman that was filming, involvement in the process, but being very vague and very agreeable, almost as if telling Terry what he wanted to hear, which it does go into interviewees on how he was just agreeing and trying to help Terry, kind of just telling him what he wanted to hear. In 1998, their reports went unanswered by police, and nothing could be done. No one bought any of it. It goes into Terry's continued obsession, the health toll that it took on him, and his eventual death. Kind of becomes a memorial to him and all that he did, the people he helped, whether people believe him or not. He died doing what he loved. Talking about how he lost a bunch of weight. He was drinking a lot more, smoking a lot more, and even his ex-wife saw him so many years later at the grocery store, didn't even recognize him just because his health had deteriorated so much. But then we jump to June 20th, 2018, 20 miles from Stanford University. Body cam footage of police at the door of Stephen Crawford, who then pulls a gun and shoots himself. Off frame, but we hear it. And then news footage of him being the security guard at the church or at the university when Arliss Perry was killed, and DNA linked him to the scene, as Terry predicted. Earlier when they were talking about that murder, Terry said that his suspect is the security guard, so he was correct. and then news showing that he had a copy of The Ultimate Evil. And so then it ends with text saying how the process disbanded in 1974, 2 years before the killings. The process denied any connection to Manson or his family. No members of the process or affiliate groups have been arrested in the Son of Sam case, and to this day, the Pine Street Irregulars continue Maury's work. Whew, so yeah, that is why I skipped over episode 1, because this really is more so about Maury Terry's findings in his theory of Berkowitz not acting alone, and episode 1 is really just step by step of the Son of Sam murders as they are. It is a well-made documentary. You know, it's well shot, it's well edited, has a bunch of great footage. The interviews are shot very well. I did feel it had a lot of false endings. There were a lot of parts, like with audio from Terry or some points that were being made that I thought would be a good cliffhanger ending, but then it goes on a little bit longer. But the ending to episodes 2 and 3, you know, ending with Manson, ending with Berkowitz's voice, I thought was really cool. Now, this was not as much as a crazy conspiracy Room 237 documentary as I was expecting, but I'm still not entirely sold on Maury Terry's theories. There still are some things where I think anyone that's looking for these answers can find them. I will say some of it is very compelling. It's all compelling. It's all interesting. It's still a great watch. But, you know, I'm still partial to believe that this is the Son of Sam case. You know, to me, I've always seen it as David Berkowitz was the killer shooter of all 13 shootings, 6 murders. You know, but it's still a compelling watch. I would say it wasn't quite as far-fetched as I thought it was going to be. You know, not quite a Room 237 documentary. Some things were kind of pulling me along, like, maybe. But at the end of it, it wasn't enough to completely convert me. And I don't know if that was the point of the documentary, because you do have voices from people saying how, you know, even people that worked with Terry for years, like one of his partners for years, saying how, you know, there were a lot of things he came up with that he thought were too far-fetched, that he thought were too coincidental. And honestly, I do think that that's the case. I do think a lot of it is coincidental. There is a lot that can kind of make you scratch your head, but not enough to really convert me. But it's still very interesting. It's still... What's more interesting is just the lengths that this guy went through for essentially 38 years, I think, is how much time he spent just dedicating his life to kind of trying to solve this puzzle. And he did end up dying from it. You know, the stress and the health problems and everything he put himself through. I mean, he was old also, but you know, I actually find that to be more fascinating, was how much time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears he put into this own investigation. Like, I don't even think he was really getting paid for this. I think this was all his own thing. And actually, there is one quote where someone says, you know, this truth was his white whale. And I do see it as that. And that, I think, is more fascinating than some of the findings that he had. Because I do think some of his findings are a little too coincidental. But the documentary itself as a presentation, I actually thought was very well made. And, you know, like any true crime Netflix docuseries, it's definitely worth checking out. Super well made. I did enjoy it, but really my favorite episode was the first one. You know, I guess I look at things as more of just like a factual or analytical way. That the first episode, just talking about the murders and the investigation very objectively, that was kind of what hooked me more. his findings, it kind of took a while to really hook me in and grab me, but it's still a very solid documentary, still interesting, but I didn't quite buy everything. So there are a few more Netflix docuseries that I will be checking out, so stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.